Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's afternoon Bible study and devotional. Once again, I got Joxer here. I got Sassy here. Yes, Sassy, hi. And we're going to be reading through Jesus is Calling for today and 1 Samuel chapter 17, David versus Goliath. Um, Before we get there, though, let's start with Jesus is Calling for today. Juxer loves it when I'm sitting down here reading to you guys. All right. So, February 3rd, 2021. I am with you and for you. You face nothing alone. Nothing. When you feel anxious, know that you are focusing on the visible world and leaving me out of the picture. Remember this simple fix. Fix your eyes on not on what is seen, but what is unseen. Verbalize. Sorry, Joxer is making it a little bit hard to read. Verbalize your trust in me, the living one who sees you always. Joxer, stop. I will get you safely through this day and all your days. But you can find me only in the present. Each day is a precious gift from my Father. How reclusive, what? Ridiculous? How ridiculous to grasp the future gifts when today's set before you. Receive today's grateful unwrapping it tenderly and developing into its depths. As you savor this gift, you find me. Yeah, sorry, it was just kind of split weird. Hi, Ryan. Welcome. So that was inspired by 3 different Bible verses. What then shall we say in response to this? If God is for us, who can be against us? Romans 8:31. So fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. 2 Corinthians 4:18. And then lastly, she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are a God of seeing, for she said, I have not, even here in the wilderness, looked upon him who sees me and lived. Or have I seen the future purpose or designs of him who sees me? Therefore, the well was called Bel Lair Roy. The living one who sees me. Genesis 16:13 to 14. Found that one a little bit hard to read for some reason. But yeah, you're not alone. Never. You face nothing alone. God is with you. And when we deal with anxieties and stuff like that, one of the prescriptions that we read with Saul was music. Worship music was one of those things, but worship music doesn't have to be church music. Worship music is music that's, sings about truth, and it enriches your spirit in truth. Yeah, so that's one of the things that we talked about yesterday with Saul, because he was feeling depressed, and there's like a diagnosis there. One of the other things is that reassuring and remembering that, yeah, we're not doing this alone. God is with us. But speaking of, yesterday and Saul being depressed and feeling anxious, and how music can help us out with that, and then how remembering that we're not alone can help with that too, because God is with us. Saul is basically now kicked out from being God, or from being king. God was like, you disobeyed me, you led my people astray, you made them make horrific, really bad oaths to you, and you almost killed your son over an oath that just did not really make any sense. Like, you lost your grip, bud. I'm raising up a new king. And the new king wasn't nearly as tall and built and whatever, but he was a good looking young man, and which also helped foreshadow like these ideas of these skyscraping kings. Wasn't how God was going to come down and lead. The Bible actually says Jesus was pretty much ugly, and we looked at that yesterday too. But in the story, David is set up to be the new king, the next king. And that's where we're going to continue to read the story today. So 1 Samuel 17, starting at verse 1. The Philistines now mustered their army for battle and camped between Skoch in Judah and Ezekah at the Ephes Dammim. Saul countered by gathering his Israelite troops near the valley of Elah. So the Philistines and Israelites faced each other in opposite hills with the valley between them. Then Goliath, a Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks to face the forces of Israel. He was over 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze helmet and a bronze coat of mail. I'm guessing that means chainmail. Which weighed 125 pounds. He also wore a bronze leg armor and carried a bronze javelin on his shoulder. The shaft of his spear was as heavy and thick as a weaver's beam, tipped with the iron spearhead that weighed 15 pounds. His armor bearer walked ahead of him carrying a shield. Goliath stood and shouted, taunting across the Israelites, "Why are you all coming out to fight?" he called. "I am the Philistine champion, but you are only the servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, then we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send a man who will fight me." When Saul and his Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. Jesse sends David to Saul's camp. Now David was the son of a man named Jesse, an Ephraite from Benjamin, in the land of Judah. Jesse was an old man at the time, and he had 8 sons. Jesse's 3 older sons, Eli, Abinadab, and Shimon, had already joined Saul's army to fight the Philistines. David was the youngest son. David's 3 older brothers stayed with Saul's army, but David went back and forth so he could help his father with the sheep in Bethlehem. For 40 days, every morning and evening, the Philistine champion strutted in front of the Israelite army. One day, Jesse, son to David, "Take these baskets of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread, and carry them quickly to your brothers, and give these 10 cuts of cheese to their captain. See how your brothers are getting along, and bring back a report on how they are doing." David's brothers were with Saul and the Israelite army at the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines. So David left the sheep with another shepherd and set out early the next morning with the gifts, as Jesse had directed him. He arrived at the camp just as the Israelite army was leaving for the battlefield, with shouts and battle cries. Soon the Israelite and Philistine forces stood facing each other, army against army. David left his things with the keeper of the supplies and hurried to the ranks to greet his brothers. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, came out of the Philistine ranks. Then David heard him shout his usual taunt to the army of Israel. As soon as the Israelite army saw him, they began to run away in fright. "Have you seen the giant?" the men asked. "He comes out each day to defy Israel. The king has offered a huge reward to anyone who kills him. He will give the man one of his daughters for a wife, and the man's entire family will be exempt from paying taxes. David, asking the soldier standing nearby, what will a man get for killing this Philistine and ending his defiance of Israel? Who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he's allowed to defy the army of the living God? And these men gave David a simple reply. They said, yes, that is the reward for killing him. But David's oldest brothers, Eliab, heard David talking to the men. He was angry. What are you doing around here anyway? He demanded. What about those few sheep you're supposed to be taking care of? I know about your pride and deceit. You just want to see the battle. What have I done now? David replied. I was only asking a question. He walked over to some of the others and asked the same thing, and received the same answer. Then David's question was reported to King Saul, and King Saul sent for him. Don't worry about the Philistine, David told Saul. I'll go fight him. Don't be ridiculous, Saul replied. There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth. But David persisted. I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats, he said. When a lion or a bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death. I have done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. Saul finally conceded. All right, go ahead, he said, and may the Lord be with you. Then Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet and a coat of mail. David put it on, strapped with the sword over it, and took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. I can't go in these, he protested to Saul. I'm not used to them. So David took them off again. He picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them in his shepherd's bag. Then, armed only with a shepherd's staff and a sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. Goliath walked toward David with his shield bearer ahead of him, sneering in contempt at this ruddy-faced boy. Am I a dog, he roared at David, that you come at me with a stick? Then David cursed he cursed David by the names of his gods. Come over here, and I'll give you flesh I'll give your flesh to the birds and wild animals, Goliath yelled. Sorry. David replied to the Philistine, you come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies. Then the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled, today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head. And then I will give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and wild animals. And the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord has rescued his people, but not with sword and spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us. As Goliath moved closer to attack, David quickly ran out to meet him. Reaching into his shepherd's bag and taking out a stone, he hurled it with his sling and hit the Philistine in the forehead. As the stone sank in, and Goliath stumbled and fell face down to the ground. So David triumphed over a Philistine with only a sling and a stone, for he had no sword. Then David ran over and pulled Goliath's sword from its sheath. David used it to kill him and cut off his head. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they turned and ran. The men of Israel and Judah gave great shout of triumph, then rushed after the Philistines, chasing them as far as Gath and the gates of Ekron. The bodies of the dead and wounded Philistines were strewn all along the road from Shuram as far as Gath and Ekron. Then the Israelite army returned and plundered the deserted Philistine camp. David took the Philistines' head to Jerusalem, but he stored the men's armor in his own tent. As Saul watched David go out and fight the Philistine, he asked Abner, the commander of his army, "Abner, whose son is this young man?" "I really don't know," Abner declared. "Well, find out who he is," the king told him. As soon as David returned from killing Goliath, Abner brought him to Saul, with the Philistine's head still in his hand. "Tell me about your father, young man," Saul said. And David replied, "His name is Jesse, and we live in Bethlehem." May God add a blessing to the reading of his word. So this, once again, a very, very dark moment for Israel. And the champion comes in the most unlikely of situations. And unlikely of ways. But before we get into kind of how I'm feeling about some of this, let's actually read what my Bible has to say. So 1 Samuel 17, 40 to 50. That's like this whole last section. Jesus looks beyond human labels. If there is one thing we learn from the pages of 1 Samuel, it is this: God frequently messes up all the rules we set up for how life should work. Young shepherds, for example, shouldn't defeat giants, and when Jesus comes on the scene, he lives out God's value. He has a habit of breaking the rules, and it drives the religious leaders crazy. During Jesus' time, there are strict labels about who is in and who is out. People deemed acceptable by the religious establishment, and those who are rejected and labeled as sinners by the religious elite. But Jesus rips up those labels and throws them away, knowing that even society's outcasts are people made in the image of God. Jesus dines with them, speaks with them, touches them, and befriends them. Jesus' life, beyond labels, reveals the dignity of each human being. Yeah, and that's the exact point that I was starting to make. And then there's this other section here which foreshadows Jesus. 17 verses 1 Samuel 17, 37 to 40. Then the God who rescued me from the claws of the lion, the bear, will rescue me from the Philistines. Saul finally conceded. "All right, go ahead," he said, "and may the Lord be with you." Then Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet, and a coat of mail. David put it on, strapped the sword over it, and took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. "I can't go in this," he protested, and Saul, protested to Saul, "I'm not used to them." So David took them off again. He picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them into his shepherd's bag. Then, armored only with the shepherd's staff and sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistines. Saul wants David to use his armor and his weapons to win victory over Goliath. But David refused to use the conventional human strength. Instead, he trusted himself to the power of God. The crowds who first follow Jesus want him to overthrow their oppressors with military strength. But he refuses, and instead overcomes the enemy of God by sacrificing himself. Matthew 26, 52 and 56. So a little bit of foreshadowing there about not using military might to overcome our enemies, which is something I really do believe right now. But even the fact that, like, the thing that I find really foreshadows Christ and his role in our lives is how David talks about his role as a shepherd. So, like, verse 34, "I've taken care of my father's sheep and goats," he said. "When a lion or bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If an animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death. I have done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defiled the armies of the living God. So, not necessarily that Jesus is going to come in clubbing things to death, but Jesus, he'll rescue us from the jaws and the snares of the enemy. He is our shepherd, and he's going to look after us. Not only does he look after us, he faced the punishment of sin for us, and he paid the ultimate sacrifice, and that is what claimed victory. Not military brute strength, but laying down his life. There's a lot in here about expectations, about revenge, about a lot of different things. Even like expectations, like the king gave David his armor, his swords. This was like, all right, cool. We have no one else that's willing to step up. I'm going to give you all that I have. I'm going to give you riches and all this other stuff to do it. And just because he was interested, Saul was like, all right, do you really want to sacrifice your life for this? All right, you're confident. You're the only one. So let me bestow this honor to you. And that honor was actually not an honor at all. It would have ended up getting him killed. So as David rejects that, which is interesting, because is there something going on in your life that if you accept or if you go in that it's actually going to lead to, not good things? And interesting, and kind of, if the world says yes, is it something that maybe you should say no to? I don't feel like that idea is fully grown in my head yet. But let me pray and get on with the day. This is a powerful story that I every time I see it, I picture like the army standing side by side. And the fact that it took 40 days, that's also a theme that's foreshadowing the Israelites in the walking in the desert. There's so many good things there. But yeah, let me pray. AJC, awesome Jesus Christ, I thank you so much for the story of David and Goliath, that you can come into our lives and conquer the sin and the hurt and the disgust, the taunting, the defiance that goes on in our lives and around us, the pain that we might feel, the hurt that we might have. You can conquer it all. You are the great physician. You are the healer. You are the leader. You are our King. May we accept and walk in you and trust in you as you have conquered death for us. I thank you that you will answer our prayers often in ways that we might not expect. Often you go against the grain of our expectations. Lord, may we be excited to see you. As I'm sure many of the Philistines that were on the field were like David's brother, going, wait, what is this kid doing? As Goliath comes out and starts mocking him viciously. There was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of trust. Lord, I thank you for David's bravery in that moment. May we be brave to say no to something that might seem good at first. And when we realize that it's wrong for us, that it's actually deterring you from what you'd have us to do, help us to say no to those things. Give us the courage and the wisdom to know what is actually good for us. Lord, you are good for us. So thank you for the story. Thank you for the lessons. May the reading here challenge us, motivate us, comfort us, encourage us. Lord, your word is the living word, and I thank you so much for it. I pray that you can bless this time that we had together. And yeah, thank you very much. Amen. All right, guys, have a fantastic day. God bless. Thank you for joining me as we read through 1 Samuel chapter 17.